Well, I'm delighted today to be speaking to Shingai Ngara from Portals Consulting Group. We're here today at the Radisson Hotel in Johannesburg. Welcome, Shingai.
Thank you, David.
So we're going to talk about some of the key trends in the South African economy as you see it. But first of all, it would be great to hear a little bit more about your background to preface our conversation.
Fantastic. So I am a half Shona, half Sotho guy. Did my schooling in Zimbabwe, did a chemical engineering degree at UKZN, and then moved from there into the mining world, and then financial services, looked at property asset management, insurance, and business banking, and then into consulting.
Fantastic. So you've got an interesting perspective on the South African economy, the most dynamic sectors and parts of it. Perhaps you could tell us which sectors you find most exciting and interesting.
For South Africa, real estate remains a very exciting asset class, and there's significant opportunity there. Residential, distribution, warehousing, and then technology, financial services, independent power production, which then talks to a new frontier of manufacturing and industrials, which I think is going to be an opportunity to then capture.
Okay, and with Portals Group, perhaps you could tell us a little bit about how you support businesses here that are going overseas.
Absolutely. So Portal's fundamental proposition is that we are an economic development consultancy. We provide consulting, capital, and capacity building as a proposition. And what that really talks to is we're looking to bring international capital into emerging markets, help businesses to grow and expand, and then be able to export and grow beyond these shores. So we're then seeing, and I think what's important to also articulate is we keep ourselves very integrated into how the market as a whole works. So we have got a very strong understanding from the trader on the street selling roasted maize to the trader selling bonds, derivatives, and equities in the capital markets, and the whole economic structure in between. And so that gives us a very strong sense as to where the opportunities are and how to then capture them to then help businesses grow.
And what are some of the best sort of projects or asset classes that people might look into, particularly from foreign capital? I mean, infrastructure, I guess, would be
Absolutely.
one. Renewables, perhaps, some of the technology. I mean, what are some of the kind of hot flavors, if you like, that people, particularly from looking from abroad, are seeking out here?
So infrastructure, absolutely.
Yeah.
So we're really trying to move more into being very export focused. And there've been considerable considerations around roads, and obviously we've got a very good road infrastructure here. The rail, getting down to port. So that consideration around how can we stimulate economic activity from a logistics and infrastructure point of view is a very significant consideration in itself. Renewables, the energy conversation is a very big conversation. Marrying into climate adaptation considerations, and also coming down the cost curve in terms of PV, gas generation, and so forth. So that's a very significantly growing space. Distribution centers and warehousing. So as economic activity is picking up, we're finding that there are several sort of e-commerce type businesses that are looking at the opportunity to give that last mile delivery.
Because I mean, COVID changed the supply chain, didn't it, very much? So did you see, I mean, I've spoken to other people who said they've seen more onshoring of the supply chain being disrupted. So things like warehousing or people changing the business model and maybe making a little bit more at home because they can't rely on China for the cheap imports that they previously.
Absolutely.
Have you seen that in practice?
Absolutely, yeah. Absolutely. So obviously, COVID was a very difficult time for a variety of reasons, but I think the opportunity in terms of supply chain is providing those who are thinking about e-commerce with an avenue that they can then revisit and create value out of the warehousing, the transport from port inland, and the distribution from there.
And what about on the capital raising front? I mean, what kind of are you working with investments here that are seeking to raise capital from abroad, or what's the sort of scenario you're working on capital raising?
So what we find ourselves working on is investments here, businesses here that are looking to expand either here in country or into the region and potentially also internationally as well, and are looking for a capital injection that could then help that. And so we're finding that the FMCG space is a space which is really growing as a space of interest, and mining and agribusiness are also spaces which are providing opportunity for people to be thinking about how they can expand from a South African base and grow from there.
And your investors for those projects might be like local pension funds or like intra-South Africa investors, is it?
So we try to blend the two.
Yeah.
So it tends to be difficult to have a conversation with someone offshore for a very sizable check when there's no local check.
Yeah.
And so we try to have a combination of capital that comes from offshore, local capital as well, that then gets into the investment opportunity.
And for the foreign investors, I mean, obviously currency is a consideration. They're looking at the return after they've made this investment, which might work out well commercially in local currency.
Yeah.
How do you see that discussion you have with foreign investors about the opportunity set that they see here?
So I think a lot of people pay very close attention to the RAND dynamics. We find that it stays contextually stable, but it has a long-term trend that it's declining on. And so, we then want to, look at how hedging considerations can be looked at, so that the currency volatility can be mitigated as a concern. But a key part of that around the currency consideration is why we're looking for very export-oriented businesses, so that they would then be earning either euros or dollars, and so that then becomes how the currency dynamic would be dealt with.
Okay, very interesting. And I mean, we're in quite an interesting juncture at the moment in the UK, where there's been a lot of challenges in the UK economy, Brexit. We're looking for trading partners.
Absolutely.
We had a presidential visit to come and see King Charles recently. I mean, what's your assessment of opportunities between the UK and South Africa for trade and investment?
I think it's one of the most significant opportunities for both sides, for the reasons that you're articulating, to consider very strongly. Obviously, from a historical basis, there's a very strong cultural alignment, there's a very strong ancestry between the two countries. And so I think, and also in terms of geographical alignment,
time zone is
it's 1 or 2 hours depending on where the clock is.
It's easy to work together,
so
isn't it?
It's very easy to work together. And I think for the reasons that have been created out of Brexit, and out of where we're looking to grow from an export point of view, I think there's a huge opportunity for a very deliberate focus on the bilateral discussion between the two countries, and how we look to facilitate not just sort of raw material export, but I think with a value-added component, real integration into value chains, I think it's a significant opportunity for us to then take forward.
One thing I've noticed is UK companies actually setting up subsidiaries here in professional services or in a service-led part of the economy, where because of remote working, because of the new styles of doing things, actually it opens up a real channel of business opportunity. And because of the time zone alignment and because of the well-trained staff that are here, there's a number of ingredients, aren't there, that I think make this partnership
and the great weather.
And the great weather,
So I definitely think so. So a couple of presidents ago, South Africa's president at the time articulated that South Africa is effectively two nations in one, in the sense that there's a part of the country that is a third world country, but there's a part of the country that is very first world and is very sort of integrated into global capital markets. I mean, so the Johannesburg Stock Exchange is estimated to have about 1% of global equities, which is a huge number for a country as
a local
small
stock exchange,
as South Africa, and so that integration makes the opportunity for particularly services professionals to go both ways, very seamless, and I think it's something which I anticipate we're going to be seeing more of.
And one such example of that is around fintech, and I think that It'd be interesting to get your view on how you see South Africa versus some of the other key African economies like Kenya and Nigeria and the progress and growth they're making in that fintech space.
So I think the contrast is very interesting. Fintech is wild west territory almost, with a lot of people seeing the opportunity in it. And I think some of the distinctions between Nigeria, Kenya, and South Africa would be very loosely that Nigeria immediately has 180 million people as a market, before they wake up to then deal with. And so that really gets them out the door, with that. Kenya, I have noted that there's been a lot of foreign founders who have gone there to then set up fintech businesses. And then South Africa, we've got, as I said, our Silicon Valley. South Africa, I think, has an advantage in that we've got a very well-regulated and enabled environment for the businesses to then grow. And I think what's been really fantastic in the last 10 years or so is, a decade or so ago, there was almost a very provincial and parochial view where you'd find someone in Nigeria or in South Africa would talk about going into Africa, which was always a bit astounding because aren't we all in Africa? But I think that view is beginning to change. And there is a view across Nigeria, Kenya, South Africa that the opportunity, particularly with where technology now, is a sub-Saharan African or even an African as a whole opportunity. And businesses are beginning to
trade,
absolutely. And so I think we're going to see over time, we're going to see some consolidation of big players across the three markets who really take a view that the continent as a whole is the playing ground, and bringing their respective insights and viewpoints and capabilities can extract the most value.
I was discussing this in a previous interview, and they said that actually going in from here perhaps to Nigeria requires a local partner, or rather than trying to necessarily railroad your way in and do everything originally, and there's a real openness to actually finding good local partners and developing strategically that way.
So I think Africa has really, in the last sort of 20 years, has really began to take that view of let's blend capabilities, blend insights, blend capabilities. And so what perhaps 20 odd years ago would have been seen as, who's coming to eat our lunch here, has now started to take more of a view of, well, what can we do together? How does this make sense for you, make sense for us? And how do we then structure it? So I think as the view becomes Sub-Saharan Africa or Africa as a whole becomes the playing ground, I think we're just seeing more collaboration, coming into play, and I think that's going to create more value.
Fascinating. But you can't talk about technology without talking about the US market, obviously, and the lure of trying to expand and list in the US, or perhaps, and really make a mark and become a global company. You're based in Washington, I guess, is a jump-off point for those most successful here who are trying to make that leap. What's your assessment around the US market?
So the US market is always a big opportunity market, but it has to be engaged from a partner point of view. It's very difficult for somebody from a different jurisdiction who doesn't have anything from the tax benefits, the government subsidies and so forth to be able to enter that market and be able to make a real dent there. And there have been some businesses who have tried, and then they've taken a view that maybe trying to do it in that way isn't the best way to then think about it.
Is that because of sort of very stark competition, like not reading the market, not having the people, not having enough scale quickly? In that, I mean, what are some of the
absolutely?
Headwinds?
So I mean, I think you've summed it up very well. So you kind of see from a desktop survey point of view, 350 million people, high disposable income. What a great market to then enter, right? But then you then get there, and it is a very competitive market, and so what does become necessary is to bring what your particular value proposition is, whether you've got a particular product differentiation, a particular access point for a partner business in the US to access another market through you so that they can see the growth potential in the relationship. And And so the partnership model becomes the best way to then enter. And I think while we have, sort of similar language, I think we have been geared historically, I think, to very corporatized businesses, which benefit from policy and regulation here, that there's a bit of an adjustment period when they then get across to the US, which is really best then dealt with a US partner. Not trying to figure it out, from the get-go.
Yeah, so because of some of the language similar, people can think it's more simple than it is. Actually, there's
Absolutely.
much more nuance to it.
Absolutely, and to your earlier point, around the UK, again, it's for all three countries, it's the same language, but there's much more. Even the Roman Dutch law precedent here that is much more aligned to the UK, versus the US. And so that's why it really is best done by looking at a partner with a mutual value proposition that you can then enter that market with. And I would say maybe just another point to add to that is certainly the US has taken a view. In August of this year, President Biden's office, released a sub-Saharan strategy, with looking at critical minerals and power supply and so forth, which they've taken a very strong interest in. What I would say is an opportunity for people in the bilateral and the diplomatic space to push for is where are the congressional appropriations that follow the strategic intent, so that there's an actual allocation of capital from a congressional appropriation that can then be capitalized upon. So, a couple of decades ago, the AGOA, the African Growth and Opportunity Act, did have not only from a strategy and a policy point of view, but there was some capital
substance behind the words.
Absolutely. And so I think there really is an opportunity at the bilateral and the diplomatic level to push for that actual allocation, that actual
fund it, resource it properly,
appropriation, so that the opportunity can be grabbed.
And what's your read on the people's perception of doing business and going to the US? Is it like did the Trump administration sort of not sour relations but put people off a little bit, or what's there's all sorts of views out there, but
sure.
Do you think that the entrepreneur, the business community here just sees an opportunity in the US, and that's whatever the political weather, they get the logic of it, or what's your sense?
I would say it varies, but I think it tends to be the more daring businesses, let me put it that way, who take the US view. So I think there's a definite consideration that there is opportunity there, but it does tend to be the more daring businesses who would then try and then make it out there.
Okay.
So the Trump idiosyncrasy was quite a period, but I think in general, businesses here look more to the UK, Australia, which are more aligned in terms of in terms of their expansion.
And you speak with a lot of entrepreneurs here, including those who have been around the block a few times and those who are coming through. What's your assessment of the next generation of entrepreneurs here, how they see the world? What's their, do you see a driven set of younger people coming through, trying to, impress on the economy, bring ideas forward and innovate? How do you see things?
So I've got a very mixed answer to that, right? So, do I see that energy? Absolutely. So there's a lot of that young energy. Let's change the world. Let's do big things. Let's redefine the map, etc. I do, though, caution the ones that I engage with to take a bit of what I call the Eric Schmidt, Sheryl Sandberg moment, right? Where Brendan Page recognized that they needed a professional manager, and Mark Zuckerberg recognized that he needed a professional manager to really help the growth story. So I do counsel that they should look for a professional manager to help them really navigate managing the business, because there's a bias that I think a lot tend to have of the technology and its brilliance is the solution. but it's the technology encapsulated in a business model, which is what then creates the value. And so I do counsel that sooner rather than later, a professional manager is brought on board, to help them really think about the business itself, and how the business can then grow. So I think that's one part of it. The energy is there. We just need to make sure that it's correctly configured. Another consideration which we're now looking at, and it's becoming a growing conversation, and we want to take a very strong position in this, is there is just some incredible university research that is coming out of universities in this market with the potential to be commercialized. And Lesotho, very small country, hardly known by a lot of people, was actually on the leading edge in respect of finding a COVID cure/vaccine. Something out of UCT, very brilliant technology in X-rays and ultrasounds for early detection of breast cancer. My alma mater in thermodynamics and so forth. So there's some really fantastic research that is coming out of our universities, and that's now starting a conversation around, let's now commercialize this, because they are real potential scale businesses that can be created out of this. And we've got blueprints from Stanford, Harvard, MIT, and Oxford as to how this can be done. And then
Do they create sort of spin-off ventures then?
Spin-off ventures, spin-off ventures that can then, give some funding into the university, but well structured with the correct commercialization, can then be real scale businesses. And I think that's another frontier that we're very excited to be part of as we think of the Africa story going forward.
And exchange controls are also being relaxed to allow people to set up offshore companies as well to help, like gather foreign investors or things like that. I understand from conversations with other professionals that this is actually helpful in this kind of context where you're trying to raise money, you've got IP and things like that might be best managed from another jurisdiction, perhaps.
So there's a couple of comments to make there, right? So some entrepreneurs who are taking a view as to how to grow their business internationally are growing their business here, and then they're already beginning to set up trust structures and so forth in favorable jurisdictions. So that can then be the platform upon which they can then grow into new markets. And then, as you say, with exchange controls and in certain instances, taxation agreements coming into play, that's then really providing the opportunity for capital to then come in, which can then create value locally. So I think we are setting the stage for entrepreneurial energy. Again, with the professional management, and I keep coming back to that point, being able to then create value that can be captured.
So you attended the networking dinner that we ran here on Monday night. There was a lot of professionals from other jurisdictions present. Do you find that you work with other professionals, or how could you help other professionals dealing with families in South Africa, looking at perhaps internationalization? Like, what kind of support might you give that kind of professional advisor?
So there's some very interesting statistics to that, right? So it's estimated that African family wealth is around $2.1 trillion, right? So that's there was a report that came out with that number. But of that 2.1 trillion, 140 billion is managed on the continent, and 80 billion of that in South Africa specifically, right? So I think there's a very significant opportunity as we look forward to be looking at wealth management on the continent. I mean, here's a very fascinating statistic that I got out of McKinsey. They did a report a couple of years ago, and they found that there were more than 430 businesses that were $1 billion a year revenue businesses, right? And so now being able to capture that wealth, manage it, so that the legacy and estate planning and so forth can be done, really presents an opportunity for us to work with the professionals in the different jurisdictions, so that, as one observer mentioned, a lot of African families want to manage wealth on continent through one relationship, and offshore through another one. And so by being able to be a bridge for those conversations to then take place, I think there's a very significant opportunity to then capture.
And also, I guess, as those families see more investment opportunities that are exciting
Yes.
locally, there's no need to send your money away to the US equity market. Actually, if there's things on your doorstep, projects that look interesting and viable.
And so a lot of our role, in that very comment is talking to the opportunities that do exist. By virtue of the way that the news cycle goes, the things that shock us are the things that take the predominance of news space, and then there's a story that is told that perhaps doesn't quite mirror the realities on the ground. I mean, just one simple number. There's an informal market in a place called Mbare in Zimbabwe that does $5 million a day in trade, right? Now that's a very significant number for an informal market, right? Now, the ability to understand that both informally and formally, there's actually a lot of good business that is actually taking place from which value can be extracted is a story that I think needs to be surfaced more, and as to what those opportunities are, and
do you think that online forums and the internet and things like that help that, because that's all about dissemination of information? If people know the opportunity to actually circulate some of these stories and information is there, I mean, what's your sense?
So, I think people who have more of a balanced view, I think, need to take up more space in the online space. I just find, as a general human psychology observation, perhaps, that the online forums, tend not to be telling the strongest stories, and the considerations that people worry about tend to be surfaced more. So, I think certainly creating podcasts and blogs and so forth that can then say, well, yes, there are these concerns, but there are also these opportunities, is something which, we'd certainly want to be part of the process in then surfacing those.
And in terms of keeping the talent that's here, present here, I mean, obviously people go abroad for education, they maybe form part of their career, build experience. Do you see that talent coming back and reinvesting in the economy and seeking out opportunities?
Yes. So there's quite a bit of that. I think you'll find a lot of young professionals will perhaps do an undergrad here and then want to do a postgrad overseas, get a bit of work experience out there, and then
that's
then
a positive thing, isn't it?
I think it's absolutely fantastic, and I think it goes back to the integration point that I think is actually very helpful. So, if you've got somebody who spends some time in Silicon Valley or in the city, who brings relationships and perspective, when you're now trying to go on a capital raise exercise and you've already had some context with a Goldman Sachs or a JP Morgan or whomever the case may be, that helps to then lubricate that, for those conversations to then take place. So we do find that there are net talent movement that I think professionals finding that they can then utilize the skills that they attain out in the UK, the US, back home, becomes quite an opportunity.
And we're coming to the end of this calendar year where we're kind of it's been a transitional year, I guess, coming out of COVID, trying to get back to normal, as it were.
Absolutely.
What's the outlook for 2023 for you? What have you got on the horizon that's of interest, and what are you looking forward to as we go into the new year?
Absolutely. So we're coming out of COVID. Things are rebalancing. There's obviously the sort of questions around are we or are we not going to go into a global recession? So those questions are definitely out there. We're in an interest rate hiking cycle as we're in now. Our view is private markets are going to be an opportunity to really look at very strongly going forward. So your private equity, again, as I said earlier, we're taking quite a very strong view on the commercialization of university research as a fantastic opportunity. There's also a consideration around philanthropy, wealth management and philanthropy. What came out of COVID as an unintended benefit was realizing that there was a far stronger philanthropic bent on the continent than people had understood before, which COVID then unleashed. That people are like, how can we help? And people put money towards that, and so we're looking at on the wealth and philanthropic side, and then again the commercialization of research being areas that we can then look at in our view for 2023 and beyond.
Fantastic. Well, look, terrific to talk to you today. I look forward to sharing this interview.
Thank you very much, David.
The latest technical content delivered through global conversations with professionals for professionals.